Hey guys, how's it going? My name is Sean, and in today's video we're going to see whether or not my girlfriend's 27-inch 5K iMac is able to run and play Fortnite. Okay, so we're currently in the game. We're about to drop out of the bus here. Before we drop out, I'm just going to go through the settings that we're going to start off with. So I've got it set to the full 3D resolution of the iMac, which is 5K, which is also known as 5120 by 2880. Just for fun, so we can see how well the computer performs. The graphics settings are all set to their absolute minimums, and we're going to turn off VSync as well, so that way we're not capping the frames per second in any way. On the left hand side here, you can see that we've got some metrics. We've got the GPU temperature, how much percent of the GPU is under load, the speed of the GPU, we've got the video memory, the memory speed, the CPU temperature and how much load the CPU is under, and also the RAM of the computer, how much of it is in use, and lastly we've got the frames per second, which is probably the most important piece of information. So we're going to get down onto the ground and sort of see how things go once all the textures load in, but at the moment you can see we're getting around about 35-36 frames a second at 5K, so already we're seeing pretty good performance at this resolution. Now, to quickly recap what components were in this iMac, we've got obviously it's a 5K 27-inch iMac late 2017. It's got the Radeon Pro 580 8GB. It's got 8 gigs of DDR4 memory or RAM, and it's got a i7 7700K CPU. Also worth noting that we're running the iMac in boot camp mode, so that means we're running Windows 10 on this computer. We're not running it in the Mac OS. We're not running the Mac OS version of the game either. So we're running everything in sort of native Windows mode, if you like. So picked up a few guns here, probably won't last very long. I'm not the best at this game. This is purely just going to be a bit of an experiment for seeing what sort of results we get. So I'll probably die quite soon, so that way we can spectate some other players who are much better at this than I am, and we see what sort of results they get when they're playing. So what I'll do is wait for this guy to hopefully kill me. He doesn't seem to be that good. I'll try and see if I can kill him first. Nah, cool, so I'm dead now, that's fine. And once we go into the spectator mode, we can actually go ahead and change some settings now. So we'll drop down from 5K because I don't think many people are going to game at that resolution considering how low the settings are. So let's drop it down to the next most popular resolution at the moment, which would be 3840 by 2160. So we'll go to 3828 2153. Everything's still set on low, VSync turned off, and hit apply. And we'll see how many frames we're getting now. So at 4K resolution, we're actually sitting at about 60 frames a second, which is actually quite remarkable considering the specifications of this computer. But it's also really good to see how well optimized this game is at the moment, considering something like this versus another popular game like PUBG. There'd be no way you could run it at 60 frames on PUBG, but 60 frames a second 4K is a really good starting place, really. The GPU temperature and CPU temperature are obviously quite hot, but if anyone that owns an iMac knows that it's very easy for the GPU and CPU to easily hit 100 degrees Celsius. It's not something that is considered to be dangerous in what Apple says, but I personally don't think that temperature is really what you would want to have your computer running at for hours on hours on hours of gaming. Side note as well, we've got the memory and RAM, so 3.3 gigs of video memory out of 8 and roughly 5 gigs of RAM. So we're sitting pretty happy as far as we've got plenty of resources available for video memory and RAM as well. So that's 4K at low settings. If we were to jump up to medium, let's see how much of an impact that has on the computer. So we jump up to medium, and we can see that we've gone from 60 frames to 30 frames. So just simply from going low to medium settings has essentially halved the effective frames per second that we're getting, which is pretty crazy. And from what I can actually see on the screen, the difference in graphics aren't that much better. I mean, there's some extra shadows and there's a little bit of extra lighting. The textures are a little bit crisper. But when you're gaming at something like 4K resolution or 5K resolution, those little, I guess, textures and shadows aren't as noticeable because the resolution is just so crisp and sharp that generally if you were running at like 4K or even 5K at low settings, most people would, be hard to find an issue with the graphics quality. So we won't go down anything lower than medium. Sorry, we won't go anything higher than medium settings, because if we go to high settings, it's just going to be really unplayable. So we'll go down to the next resolution, which is quite popular, which is actually my favorite resolution to play games at, which is 2560 by 1440. So we'll get that to roughly 2568 1444. Set it to medium settings again. Actually, we'll start with low. Let's do that and hit apply. And so we can see now we're easily exceeding 60 frames a second. Obviously, it's not having to render as many pixels. So 60 plus frames per second is what I personally aim for. I know that a lot of people want higher than 100 frames a second now, or even 144 frames a second or 200 frames a second, depending on the type of game that they're playing. I know that esports, people want as many frames as possible, 200 or 300 plus, which is just not going to be possible with this kind of hardware in this iMac. So at 2560 1440 low settings, hovering around the 80 frames per second mark, that's something that I would think most people would be very, very happy with. If we go ahead and change it to medium, like before, it approximately halved our frame rate. So let's see if it does the same thing here. So we'll hit apply, and same thing again. So we've gone from around about 80 frames a second down to roughly about 55 or 60. So if you look at the before and afters of going from low to medium settings at this resolution, the actual graphics itself hasn't really been enhanced to the point where I would justify losing 20 or 30 frames for the sake of gameplay. For games like this that are action paced and really fast, I would be suggesting someone to stick to low settings and getting plus 60 frames per second, as it's also not going to put as much of a load on your GPU or CPU. So we can see the GPU and CPU now, the temperatures have dropped right down, or not right down, but definitely now below the 90 degrees Celsius mark, which if you're playing for a few hours on end every night, is a lot healthier for the system. If we were to change the settings again, and let's go down to the next most popular resolution, which is probably 1920 by 1080. A lot of people still gaming at that resolution, so we'll put everything on low just so we can see what it's like. Hit apply, go back. So now we're on low settings at 1080p on the 27-inch iMac, and we're getting over 100 frames per second. So a lot of people wanting to play these kind of games want to exceed 100 frames. So with this hardware, with this iMac, you would have to go down to that resolution to get plus 100 frames per second. Personally, I don't think it's needed or justified, but that's just my personal opinion. I would be quite happy with sitting around about 60 or 70 frames, as I said before. If we were to go up to medium settings at 1080p, you can still see that we're getting a roughly 60 frames per second. Graphics quality is a little bit more noticeable because the resolution is lower. So when you go down into lower resolutions, generally you have to increase the graphics settings, the textures, as they're more noticeable. But when you're at like 4K or 2560 by 1440, changing the graphics settings aren't as noticeable because the pixels are so fine and it's rendering everything so fine that the things like shadows and textures just aren't as noticeable when you change those settings around. So if you're at 1080p, you probably wouldn't be having it on medium or high settings. If you're at anything above that, you could probably be on low settings and be completely fine and completely happy and have a much better gaming experience. Now lastly, just for fun, what we'll do is we'll go to full 5K, we'll put everything on epic and we'll just see what happens here. So 10 frames a second now at 5K, everything on epic. It does look really good, like I will admit, even though it's running really slowly, the graphics do look super nice, but at 10 frames a second it's just not playable. I wouldn't recommend anyone playing a game at 10 frames a second, it's just not going to be enjoyable. If we go back to my favorite resolution, 2560 by 1440, let's do that quickly. Trying to get it here. Let's go 2579, that'll be good enough for me. Put everything on low, turn on VSync. So now this will cap the frame rate to 60 frames a second. And so we can see here now on the left hand side we've got the D3D11, so Direct 3D, DirectX 11 staying locked at 60 frames a second, and the GPU and CPU should hopefully fall in temperature, because once you enable VSync you're essentially locking the frame rate to what the refresh rate of the screen is. So if your refresh rate of your screen is 60 Hertz, then you're locking the graphics card to only run at 60 frames. So one frame is 1 Hertz if you look at it that way. So GPU temperatures now dropping below 90, CPU temperatures hovering around about that 90 degree mark. I'd be pretty comfortable with playing a few hours of Fortnite at this setting with these temperatures in mind, and you shouldn't have any issues either. So thanks for watching these quick little videos, these benchmarks if you like, and if you do have any requests for other games such as PUBG or maybe GTA 5 or Battlefield when that comes out, let me know and I can do maybe some similar benchmarks for those of you who are gaming on a iMac as well. And be sure to also check out my other videos, which are my 4K gaming PC and all the equipment that I use in my studio, so you can get some ideas on what gaming performance that you get versus an iMac 2 or PC. So thanks for watching this video. If you did like this video, then make sure to leave me a thumbs up, maybe leave me a comment or a question down below, and remember to press the subscribe button if you want to see more videos like this. Just to mention as well that you can also follow me on Facebook and Instagram, and you can also buy any of the tech that you saw here today using one of the Amazon links down below as well. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Cheers.